Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that this is going to be a really fruitful and interesting dialogue, one we've never done before at AII. So eager to see how this plays out and eager to see how these young minds produce interesting contributions to the policy sphere. My name is Benjamin Durker. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure. And at AII, we have a robust intern program. We do that based out of Washington, D.C. And these are 8 of our esteemed interns from this past summer, 2026, participating in the Fund for American Studies program as well. These students come from a range of backgrounds all across the country. And today they will be dialoguing with Aii Advisory Council member Mothusi Pahl. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mothusi, for this moderated discussion, and I really look forward to seeing where the direction goes. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Benjamin, thank you for the introduction and for teeing up this afternoon's discussion. My name is Mothusi Pahl. I'm the principal at Hartwell and Locke and a member of the advisory committee for AII. My background is largely focused on energy infrastructure, new technology, with particular interest recently in artificial intelligence and physical AI and applications in the energy and infrastructure ecosystem. So I'm excited about this opportunity to interact with the AII 2026 crop of summer interns. It's nice to see each of your faces. I've read many of your blog posts and have heard pretty regular updates from Benjamin. So it's nice to have you here. And I look forward to learning about your perspective on the infrastructure ecosystem and AII as a major influencer in the infrastructure innovation ecosystem. And hopefully over the course of this panel, we have a little bit of time to unpack your insights and learnings from the summer. So I'd like to start off by going around and doing a set of brief introductions. Interns, I'm going to call you out as you're appearing on my team screen. If you could give us your name, university, your program of study, and 30 seconds on what you spent, well, let me rephrase that, 30 seconds on what was most of greatest interest to you in terms of what you researched or what you worked on this summer. So it's name, institution, area of study, and then a 30-second snapshot. All right. So first on my screen here is Shivam. Why don't you start us off?
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, my name is Shivam. I'm a computer science and politics student at New York University. And my greatest interest, I'd say this summer, was writing about the new bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Build America 250 Act, and then also exploring some topics I was interested in with housing development projects, mainly located in California.
Thank you very much. Lexi, you're up.
Hello, my name is Lexi, but my government name is Alexandria. I'm a rising senior at the College of Charleston, studying economics, international studies, and Spanish. And this summer, I didn't really have a specific infrastructure topic that I really wanted to work on. To be completely honest, I haven't had much exposure to anything before coming to AII, but I was interested in seeing how certain economic principles or ideas intersected with infrastructure and how policymakers come together and reach policy goals.
Thank you. Will.
Hi, my name is Will. I am a rising sophomore, also at New York University. I'm a double major, so I'm studying environmental studies and politics. My most prominent research topic was the energy transition. So one of my most recent articles was about the lack of transmission lines in urban cities such as New York City, and how a lot of solar panels, wind turbines, such as renewable technology like that, can't really reach those sources. So I was very happy to work at AII. I'm very interested in energy transition, and our topics cover that.
Thank you. Vincent.
Hi, I'm Vincent. I go to the University of Florida, where I'm studying history and PPE. And this summer, I've enjoyed researching into Supreme Court precedents, such as the end of Chevron deference and the major questions doctrine and how that applies to infrastructure policy.
Thank you very much. Isabel.
Hi, my name is Isabel. I go to the University of Pittsburgh and I'm studying economics. And this summer, I found a lot of interest in researching aging infrastructure and possible ways to modernize that infrastructure, especially the electric grid. And I also found it interesting researching clean energy solutions that we can add to the modernization of the infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Next on my screen is Francisco.
Hello, my name is Francisco Gutierrez. I'm a rising junior at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. My main interest during this internship is researching into how federal and state legislation affects incentives towards or against particular energy sources. So one of the papers I wrote this internship was about North Carolina and how the combination of federal legislation, especially the CHIPS Act, but also state policy, including low corporate and personal income tax, has created this innovative tech hub that's known as the Research Triangle in North Carolina.
Thank you. Next on my screen is Samuel.
Hi, I'm Samuel Corral. I'm a rising senior at CSU Northridge in Los Angeles, studying urban studies and planning. Yeah, my favorite policy blog was this one about roundabouts in Carmel, Indiana, just seeing how it transformed the city. Yeah, I also did a lot of research into like underground infrastructure and seeing like just comparing it across the U.S. Like in Chicago, they have a huge lead pipe issue of having to replace them, and that's something that's been happening across the country. Just all this like aging infrastructure, just seeing how we can replace it.
Excellent. Thank you each for those comments. So one of the recurring themes in infrastructure ecosystem today, whether it's on the water side or the natural gas side or the rail side or data centers, let alone electricity, is around permitting and permitting reform as a key theme. There's no question in my mind that permitting is a central problem to each of the issue areas that you unpacked, at least in the blog post that I read about. So would be curious to get your thoughts on permitting reform as it relates to the projects you studied. So I'm not asking you to think about or explore this into uncharted territories. I want to go specifically to your topics of interest. Let's start off with I think Will, it was your comment about connecting renewable generation in urban areas and the lack of kind of interconnection opportunities or line capacity. Is that a permitting issue, or how do you think of permitting relative to this problem that you identified?
Yeah, so I have two things to say about that. The first is in response to your answer. I do absolutely think that one of the elements that delays the transmission lines and their construction is permitting, especially because a lot of them have to go across state borders. And these states are very persistent on where they want these these transmission lines to be. So they'll fight over it for maybe a year or two, and it takes a very long time for them to be developed. And it's very unfortunate because a lot of the energy that's yielded from renewable technology, it's about double the amount that we can actually use because of the failure of transmission lines, which takes me into the second answer that I wanted to give you, which is about my second policy blog. I actually wrote about the Freedom Act and how it was specifically targeting the absence of efficient permitting and how a lot of these projects, whether it's wind, whether it's conventional natural gas, whatever, both Republicans and Democrats are having issues with it. So there's a lot of bipartisan support, like with the Freedom Act, to get this off the road.
So let me drill in on that a second. I mean, I agree with you on the transmission piece, but your New York project wasn't transmission related. It was local distribution. So, I mean, how are you thinking about that as a kind of 5-borough issue?
Yeah, so it's mostly a problem of, it's not necessarily like a local problem because the solar panels and wind turbines and all these renewable technologies are in New York City. They're all around New York City. Like they're expanding beyond like the up into the upstate area. And when we're trying to get all that energy yield down to New York City, it's really difficult because you need lithium ion batteries, you need all these rare earth minerals, you need all these different things. And on top of that, there's so much government gridlock that prevents these from being built. So it's not necessarily just a local problem. It's just a broad tri-state problem where they can't get the energy to be directed to the correct places. And that's what's causing the energy failure.
Vincent, let's pull this over to your side. I know a lot of your writing was around, or at least the stuff I looked at was around infrastructure governance and building reform. Tell me about how you're thinking about permitting.
Well, permitting, I think as far as the regulation area, we were looking more at government agency regulations, for example, with the EPA. And so one of the issues I wrote about was the overturning of Chevron deference, which was a long-standing ruling essentially saying that courts should defer to federal agencies like the EPA on issues. However, in 2024, the ruling was overturned in the Supreme Court case Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo, which shifted power back to the judiciary. So, along with the major questions doctrine being instituted by the Supreme Court in recent times, which I also wrote about, essentially there's been a major shift from executive agencies towards judicial interpretation. So there's a lot less weight now behind the regulatory process, probably including a lot of permitting concerns for agencies like the EPA.
So the takeaway here, I mean, let's just map that back to Will's comments about New York. I mean, if we've got capacity constraints and we need to build, but nobody's willing to make a decision on what is or isn't viable, does that mean that's going to eternally default to a judicial decision? Like, I mean, how do we get anything done if that's the case? I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, what can you tell us from what you studied as it relates to this first problem area that Will's identified?
See, I mean, I think the major takeaway from these Supreme Court cases, and the court kind of alluded to this, is that Congress basically needs to do its job and specifically outline what powers federal agencies have. For example, to allow them to institute guidelines that are going to allow people to build, and that otherwise it's just going to end up in the courts. The courts are really urging Congress to provide specific instructions because the federal agencies that they've often given broad power into the past, they've determined it's just not constitutional for them to have that wide range of authority.
So Isabel, you did pretty deep work on grid modernization. How do you see permitting and permitting reform, or do you see permitting and permitting reform as an issue area there?
Yeah, in my research, I definitely found that like getting permitting approved and is a pretty difficult process. And I actually read about how the Solar Energy Industry Association is like actually kind of pushing for permit reform, and I'm pretty sure they're doing some legal work to try to get some reforms done to make it a simpler process, because at least from what I've read, it seems like a lot of the different permits you need and a lot of the different things you need approved are kind of redundant and repetitive. And I think they're trying to work on making it just a simpler and smoother and faster process overall.
Alexandria, talk to us about how you're thinking about permitting. I think particularly around your exploration in water infrastructure.
Yeah, so I wrote a lot about aging infrastructure in terms of the water, municipal pipes and water infrastructure. I think, like Isabel mentioned, I know it is kind of a lengthy process, and I'm not exactly sure on, the ins and outs of the reform or of the process of permitting, but I think it is a hurdle that a lot of infrastructure upgrades and renovation they have to hop over those hurdles in order to improve the reliability of those systems. Yeah, I think that's what I have to say.
Samuel, how are you? I mean, how does permitting and permitting reform relate to your summer's work?
My what? Sorry.
Your research this summer.
Oh, my research. Okay. Yeah, it does relate. I did also work on a project with Lexi about underground infrastructure, and I wrote a policy blog about lead pipes in Chicago. Yeah, a big issue is like, yeah, it can be, permits can get really expensive, and it's definitely a hurdle that homeowners need to overcome.
Shivam, same to you. I know you've spent, I think, kind of background, have done quite a bit of work in and around urban planning and mobility in particular. I mean, that's permitting intensive. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the one thing I draw upon was the blog I was writing about for the California Forever project. And there was controversy because all these wealthy investors were buying up land, but the residents of Solana County voted no on a proposal. And now they're trying to push past legislators for environmental reviews. So I think it's interesting to see the fact that this project was sort of capital first, like where they bought up all this land, but they have to deal with all the environmental regulations and then obviously blowback from citizens who live in that area.
Thank you. Francisco, how are you thinking about permitting relative to your work this summer?
My thoughts on permitting in relation to my work this summer is that there seems to be differences in the difficulties if you're looking at federal or state governments. It seems that for many states, the work is actually more stable because usually what ends up happening is that there's a political party or an establishment that retains power for a longer period of time. So they're able to focus more on not only starting legislation, but seeing that legislation carry on through. So like with North Carolina, they proposed tax cuts to personal and corporate tax back to 2016, and they've been continuing that project now for 10 years. Whereas in the same amount of time, we had the first Trump administration with the first Keystone pipeline, which was then canceled under the Biden administration. But then now under the second Trump administration, now you have a scenario where like multiple windmills that are almost complete by the coast of Maine are being canceled. Coal mines that are scheduled to shut down very soon are suddenly being pressured to start up again. So that's what I'm noticing is more stability stateside, but on the federal side, there's a little bit more chaos, especially when a new administration starts.
So let's, Francisco, I'm going to stick with you. Follow-on question that's related to permitting, but kind of a little bit broader. I read your piece about, I think about refining, and it was like a redefining American oil or something close to that. I know in popular media, the White House credited this first refinery build in decades to having streamlined permitting process and to a lower tax environment, and that created the opportunity and the space for this refinery to be built. But if you go back and do the research, I mean, this project has been in process for decades. So it would seem to me that one of the flagship arguments for permit reform really isn't a function of permit reform. It was a long, arduous, grinding process at local and state level. And arguably, more importantly, the refiner is an Indian company. So most of the investment, as you reported on, came from outside of the US. So the kind of the economic question in that, and I think that economic, and this is where kind of the next question for the rest of the group is going to go, is the cost of these projects are staggering. How should we be thinking about cost allocation and cost management and economics of these infrastructure projects when we're in a space where nobody really wants to pay for anything? Everybody wants the benefit, but doesn't want to carry the cost. So, Francisco, my question to you is, like, particularly as it relates to your case study about the Reliance refinery, like, how do you think about energy in the U.S.? How do you think about refining in the U.S. if it's taking an international investor to come to the table to actually get this thing off center and get it built?
Yes, I guess I'll answer it in two ways. The first is that it seems that we're in the midst of a kind of forced energy revolution. For the past few decades, we've been able to basically coast off of the infrastructure that we already had while being able to still build new infrastructure for renewables, while also pivoting away from coal and more into LNG. But with the AI revolution, now we need to upgrade our capacity like double in the span of like 10 years of infrastructure that was created across a century. The second is that it seems that the current situation that we have right now of energy is indicative of, as I've stated, the instability of the federal government in handling energy infrastructure relatively to other countries where it seems that for any issues they may have in their politics or their economy, they have a more stable infrastructure framework of, we need to build this in order to get this amount of energy, in order to support X amount of infrastructure, and they go and do that. Whatever permits they have, whatever regulations they have, whatever restrictions they have, it seems that they are able to do that. And China's a big example that people usually bring up, but I think that's just half the story. The other half is like using the United States as a comparison. In comparison to, say, all this infrastructure buildup in China, we can just look at the state of California and see within the amount of time that it has allotted to build one high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles, it's not done, not close to done. So I think we need to seriously examine what has been going on in the United States with regards to energy infrastructure, especially since the 1990s. Look at that, look at what the rest of the world has been doing since then, and we need to form a game plan that we can all rally around.
To your California example, I think California is closer to not having gotten started than it is to not having the project completed. So there's no question. There's there's a long way to go there. Samuel, same question to you as it relates to water infrastructure.
Yeah, as it relates to water infrastructure, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean the economic cost here is not trivial. So it's one thing to be aspirational and to talk about how you want, how important water infrastructure is, but are people really willing to pay for it? And if you're a policymaker or you're responsible for regulatory environment, I mean, does that mean we need international players to come in and invest in the infrastructure because we're not willing to pay for it ourselves? Like, I don't know where you take this, but how do you think about economics and cost benefit, particularly as it relates to the water infrastructure research you did?
Yeah, well, honestly, I'm not completely sure either. I mean, it is a problem. You just got to look at like the incentives, like that are being created with these new policies. It's really complicated.
What do you mean by that when you say being created by these new policies?
I mean, here, wait. Sorry.
Here, why don't we come back to you on?
Yeah, I have to refresh on my.
Isabel, can we? I mean, the same question to you. I mean, as you're thinking about, or as you were exploring, these concepts of grid of the future, or kind of grid modernization, how do you think about the economics?
I think that there is definitely a significant investment that needs to be put into it, because when you look at kind of the short-term versus the long-term outcomes, like in the short term, you would be investing a lot more money, but in the long term, you would get more benefit of it. Because right now, I feel like data centers and just like our energy use right now in general is causing a lot of prices to rise, especially in people's just electric bills and energy bills. And there's a lot of policies that are being debated. Like one policy I looked at that was being debated was if there's a way to make the data centers like somehow bear the cost for the energy they're using. And a lot of the things I read in my research was just, I know the US Department of Energy is advocating for investors to invest in cleaner energy solutions to kind of just look out for the long run of this, because in the long run, it will have an economic benefit. It's just the initial cost would be a lot and would potentially be damaging in the short run.
So I do a lot of utilities work and distribution level work. And I mean, if you look at the data, I mean, we can see that most of the increases in individual consumer electricity prices over the last decade have had nothing to do with data centers. It's all been distribution. It's distribution and the cost of aging infrastructure. So when you say data centers are causing prices to go up, I mean, that hasn't been the historical reason for why prices are going up.
I don't think I said that data centers are the reason. I was just talking about what policymakers are discussing, and one of the discussions I saw was to make AI data centers bear the cost, but I wasn't claiming that they did. That was just a policy I saw being discussed.
Vincent, let's turn that same question to you. I mean, the economic implications here.
Let's see. Yeah, I was also writing about data centers recently, kind of a change of pace from legal oriented work. I was sort of looking more into the political anti-data center movement. I think one of the some of the reasons are there's a lot of general anxiety about AI and about the economic impacts of AI. So I think people are seeing data centers through that lens. Furthermore, there's just a lot of uncertainty about how data centers are going to impact water availability, water prices, electricity prices. It is true, like a lot of like pro data center arguments have often suggested that electricity prices could actually go down due to data center companies investing in the grids or making or working on their own electricity. Similarly, there's no like national like federal reporting system for water usage. So it's difficult to find any real like nationwide statistics, which makes it very easy for people to make very passionate arguments without really being fact checked necessarily. I think those are some of the issues around data centers at the moment.
So, Shivam, let's come over to you. I mean, as it relates to, I think one of the through lines in your work that I read about, the piece I read most recently was highways or transit. Tell us about economics and kind of cost benefit and how you think about investment that would be required to reach any of the objectives that you identified.
Yeah, so for that blog, I wrote about the difference between the IIJA Act and the new Build America 250 Act. And so just thinking in terms of economics, that act signed by Biden in 2021 was a $1.2 trillion act, and this is a $580 billion act. But the IIJA was $500 billion allocated to new development and projects. So if you look at the statistics in terms of base of like guaranteed funding and appropriations funding, it's very similar. But the point of my article was the fact that a lot of transit enthusiasts are complaining about the fact that more funding is going to highways and car dependent infrastructure, and especially in the US, which has now sort of prioritized, transit and rail compared to our highways. That's what the complaint was about.
So, I mean, you're pointing to all of these dollars that are being allocated, but those are tax dollars. So, I mean, why should my tax dollars be going to your transit benefit? I mean, the issue isn't just about me personally, but I think in aggregate, like how should we be thinking about the investment dollars that are required to make the advancements that are being advocated for? Like, tell me how you're thinking about the cost benefit there and the cost allocation.
I think you do have a point. I think it's important to note that there are only a few cities in the US where, transit is a commonplace, and I think New York is like probably the most notable example. But it is true that the fact that everyday Americans are using highways on their daily commutes, and that is a fundamental aspect. It's just the fact that for transit enthusiasts, we are accommodating more towards highways in this act than allocating funding for transit in the previous one.
So, Samuel, let's come back to you, or maybe this can be joint response between you and Alexandria about water infrastructure. I mean, we all need water, but water is really cheap, and infrastructure and excavating and laying pipe is really expensive. So how do you connect those dots?
Well, yeah. That is interesting. I didn't write about data centers at all, but in terms, I can look at the cost of lead pipes. So yeah, I mean, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, permitting is a big issue. So like this new amendment to the Environmental Protection Act, it would basically, it would force, it would state that like all private property owners they must allow them to come in and replace the pipes. That way they can do a full like block level replacement instead of individual. And it would, they think it would speed up the process. It's hard to know for sure, but yeah, it is really complicated.
So Alexandria, like my question is specific to economics and the investment. How are you thinking about that relative to your water research?
Yes, I do think this is a prominent issue that my most recent piece was about water infrastructure in the World Cup, and I think this is a problem that, or an idea that a lot of host cities were thinking about in terms of, you know, improvements for tournaments and games hosted in their cities and whatnot. So there is obviously a lot of economic benefit that is generated from mega events like the World Cup. So that would incentivize these host cities to make the proper investments to their public goods, their water infrastructure, even if that does come with an upfront cost, because they're expecting a benefit that at least breaks even, or I don't want to say makes up for, but it's at least as big as that upfront cost. So I think that is important to think about. Also, when thinking about renovation of water infrastructure versus complete replacement, I think that is another thing that people are talking about in terms of cost, because how much would it cost to rip out a whole old system and replace it with something new, rather than
but if we stick with I'm going to cut you off here. I mean, if we stick with your theme about infrastructure and its association with major events, I mean, there was no water disruption during the World Cup. So wouldn't that stand to reason that there wasn't any investment necessary?
I would say just because there weren't any major, tournament disruptions that, made national news, it doesn't really talk about decreases in reliability or slowdowns that might arise because of this increased demand for this infrastructure during these times of high stress. So I don't think that's necessarily a great justification for, keeping investment away from these structures. Yeah.
So Samuel, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, on that note about major events, yeah, I think it is interesting seeing how major events like the World Cup give them more incentives to invest in like their transportation infrastructure, for instance. Yeah, we in Los Angeles, where I'm from, we got the Olympics coming up. So yeah, that definitely has given them more incentive to invest in their public infrastructure.
Understood. So, Will, let's shift gears here a little bit. One of your pieces was about geothermal and why it's a hot topic in 2026. Geothermal is certainly an area of interest of mine. And one of the things that's interesting about geothermal, particularly in today's political environment, is that it seems to be one of the issues that has not just superficial bipartisan support. How did that come about, and like, are there lessons or takeaways there for these other infrastructure related projects that your cohort has worked on?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure the origin of why the Republican and Democrat Party how far along they've been investing into geothermal energy. I believe it's been mostly since 2018 because it's a pretty easy form of energy because a lot of the tools that are used in coal and oil, for example, can also be used for geothermal, except it's a lot more sustainable. I think there's kind of a common denominator between both parties, and they both want energy for the AI bubble. And so many private and public sectors are investing in energy, specifically geothermal, to deal with the energy demand. And I think it's just going to become increasingly so over the next course of years as we see the rise of AI in unprecedented quantities. So I'm really excited to see where that goes, because I do genuinely think geothermal energy is A, sustainable, and B, has potential for both parties to invest in.
So personally, I would caution you on referring to geothermal as an easier pathway. The technical complexity, especially with the chemistry and the temperatures involved, make it extremely complex, especially at hotter temperatures. But I do want to ask you, Vincent, to Will's comment. I mean, there were a couple of elements there. One, the reference to AI as a bubble. For all of the infrastructure challenges that are being introduced as a result of current activity in the AI ecosystem, whether or not it is a bubble, there's certainly surge in interest and surge in problems that are being identified, whether it's on the water side or on the power side. Coming back to this piece about the concept of bipartisan support, what do you think from a legal perspective of that intersection of, it would seem that to drive anything at speed and with any continuity over time, that we need some bipartisan support. I mean, where does that come from, and how do you think about that at the kind of the crossroads that are today in this AI large compute data center ecosystem?
I mean, yeah, I think AI to develop further through constructing more data centers and just general expansion, definitely bipartisan support would be very useful. I think we're actually seeing right now somewhat on the opposite end, somewhat bipartisan opposition. Like large majorities of both Democrats and Republicans are expressing that they're very skeptical towards AI, that they have a lot of economic anxiety about it. More on the progressive side, we're seeing that in a lot of deep blue cities, states, they're passing moratoriums on building data centers. There was a city in the LA suburbs called Monterey. They recently passed a permanent ban. So I think that an important part is going to be convincing the public, convincing the parties to adopt a more pro-AI stance in order to move that forward. As far as the regulatory agencies go, I think their power has been somewhat decreased in recent times, so maybe that helps industry develop somewhat, as I would figure that conservative leaning federal courts, the Supreme Court, would be probably a bit more pro building as opposed to a weakened EPA. However, I think a lot of the public discussion on AI, the AI bubble, there's just a lot of uncertainty generally. And I think the uncertainty is making a lot of people anxious. Like, I know as far as like the AI bubble, like I see AI startup ads on social media all of the time. And while this isn't directly linked to infrastructure, it's impacting public opinion on AI, and it shows that there's a lot of AI companies that just don't really seem to be doing anything practical. So I don't know. I think the AI bubble is maybe something I'm not entirely qualified to speak on, and I'm not sure if much of anyone is at this point.
So, I mean, from a building and construction perspective, and everything infrastructure is rooted in building and constructing either greenfield or renovation. I mean, it's the nothing kills a project like uncertainty. And having been a part of enough projects that failed due to either federal uncertainty or state uncertainty or local level uncertainty, when you talk about a national level kind of, or nationwide, a more pro AI stance, where does that even come from? I mean, if we use that as an example or as a signal within the ecosystem, if that's what's driving growth, if that's the main instigator behind a lot of today's infrastructure thinking, like what story do you build out of that? How do you build that story?
I mean, I think as far as the AI industry needs to demonstrate to people that their work is meaningful. To some extent, it might just have to happen at an expert level, a politician level. Because right now, I think if you're looking at it from a political perspective of trying to win elections, I think it's pretty clear right now that the most effective way to win elections is by demagoguing about AI and just expressing very negative sentiments, exacerbating fears. I think that's the way to get elected right now, if we're looking at it. So I would hope that politicians can take a higher road and try to follow the facts.
So Francisco, Arizona is AI hotbed, is a compute hotbed. That's home for you. You've done a lot of research in and around energy this summer and infrastructure. Like, how are you thinking about the challenges introduced by kind of this current AI era, and coming back to this kind of bipartisan theme? Like, how does this make you think about your home state and what your home state's currently trying to navigate?
Certainly. I think the AI revolution is actually showing sort of how inefficient our legislation around water has been for decades. Long story short, most of our water is not being taken up by AI data centers. The big problem is farming, specifically farming for water-intensive crops such as alfalfa and certain type of nuts. The amount of water that is given to farmers for their crops was drawn up due to agreements decades ago during a year where there was an abnormally high amount of snowfall in the Colorados, which led to an abnormal amount of water. And since then, it has not only gone down back to the normal, but it has actually decreased since the southwestern United States has been in a multi-decade long drought. So I think that with the investment that's been going on, with all the jobs, all the AI data centers, and all of that, we can really start to examine again, okay, how are we using our water and what should the future of it be? Right now, Arizona, California, Nevada have still not agreed to a common water agreement of how the water from the Colorado River is going to be distributed. If there's no agreement, the federal government will have to step in and force an agreement on everyone. So it's a big question right now of how are we going to use the water, including for the farmers who for decades have been using it for crops.
So Siobhan, like New York, has made some pretty significant moves around data centers just in the last week or two. They don't seem to have been very bipartisan in nature, or maybe they were, to Vincent's point about bipartisan in kind of joined opposition. Like, how are you thinking about and what's happening in state for you right now as it relates to data centers and AI?
Yeah, I saw that news. I believe it's for all of New York State. I do think I agree with Vincent's point that AI has become a talking point a lot for politicians in an effort to, if they push back on it, it makes them look more notable, especially in the face that a lot of people have environmental concerns with data centers and the high water usage. I think it really, the way I am trying to think about it is the nature between us as a country and then states, like the disparity between them. And sort of like we often hear from AI thought leaders about the race against China. And so if we need to build out all these data centers and all these infrastructure projects, but you have state politicians that want to, benefit from bans on AI data centers, like how do we think about that? How do we think about ourselves? Like, do we think about ourselves at the local level, at the state level, or at the country level? And where do you align more with? Are you more concerned about us as a country and an AI race against China? Or are you more concerned about at the local level, cost to your electricity or what's going on environmentally?
So my last question here, Isabel, I'm going to direct this over to you as we're kind of winding down on time. Again, with this kind of AI theme, how like the kind of recurring pattern of bipartisan piece, the recurring element about AI's kind of prominence and influence in all of these discussions that we're having. The data center build out and demands on the grid. Your piece about grid modernization challenges, like if it all comes down to cost allocation, and it comes down to overwhelming bipartisan, what do we do with this? And I ask this from the perspective of an AII advisor for AII's members. How should we be thinking about this, and what are the takeaways, particularly from in your mind, as it relates to grid modernization?
Yeah, I think in my mind, just with my research, it seems that there's not a lot of movement on like the data center issue. Like if people aren't like basically figuring out the issue, like if they're not going to put restrictions on the data centers or it's like taking a long time, I think the focus should be on grid modernization just to be able to adapt to like that high amount of energy usage. And I just think it's kind of hard to say who wants to invest it and who is willing to invest it, but I just think like the Department of Energy is promoting or advocating for investors to invest in some of their solutions, I think is a good idea. Maybe just spreading like more information and education on people that would be willing to be private investors for certain projects would be a good idea.
And Vincent, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to what we were talking about with water usage. Like, I think I mentioned earlier about like federal reporting standards and how there aren't really any. And I think that's just really impacting like having hard statistics. For example, like we don't have like the statistics to know how rapidly like the water usage has increased due to AI. Like we've had like some estimates from a couple years ago, and it's like comparable to golf courses in America and far less than agriculture, especially alfalfa, like Francisco was talking about. So I think when we don't have hard statistics, it's difficult to see things within proportion and perspective. And I think that really allows like politicians and people with motivations to distort the dialogue a lot.
Well, fortunately, we've got a strong crop of AII interns who are chomping at the bit to take on the U.S. agricultural industry and to make their water consumption apparent to the rest of the ecosystem. That's a joke. We're going to end there. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, interns, for a job well done this summer. And Benjamin, we'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Mothusi, and thank you everyone for your insightful comments. This is a great event. I'm really pleased with how it went, and I'm looking forward to future intern panels and dialogues. I think you've all proved the concept well. just so long as Mothusi's available for all the moderating. I just want to thank you all again for your hard work this summer and all the work that you did. I hope that Washington, D.C. treated you well, AII treated you well, and you'll go on telling all your friends and family about how AII is helping move the needle on public policy challenges and infrastructure solutions. Anyone who tuned in to watch this event, we hope that you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more, you can visit aii.org. AII is the only nationwide public policy think tank dedicated to infrastructure. And so solving infrastructure challenges is just as important to us as raising up the next generation to do the same. This intern panel is part of that. And so we thank you for being on the journey with us. Head over to ai.org and everyone have a great rest of your day.